Good morning to you all. This morning's reading is from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 1 through 13. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, that is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Here ends this morning's reading.
Good morning. What's love got to do with it, huh? Well, aside from being a pretty good 80s song, it's actually a pretty good question. Some scriptures are so incredibly deceptive in their simplicity. Like, take today's reading Dominic just gave us. How hard is it to talk about love? I mean, we're used to getting up here and preparing for an Old Testament verse or chapter, and it's like, we got to study all these people, places, and things. And this is just so much more conceptual. We understand what love is, don't we? We can embrace love. It's really simple. Here, let me show you what I mean. I love my family. That's a bit of a strange picture, but I love them anyway. Everybody can love their spouse and children, right? I love my cat. Most people love pets, right? Dogs and cats, they're great. Who doesn't love them? I love the Philadelphia sports teams, even the Sixers. I love music. I mean, who doesn't love music, right? Chris Tomlin, he's a great Christian artist. Sure, we can all agree that we love that. I can get up here and talk about my love for the church. It's a great building. I love the people in this church. I truly do. And that's a great love to have. And this is the greatest soft drink that's ever been created. Diet Dr. Pepper. I don't drink coffee, so I drink a ton of Diet Dr. Pepper. And I love it. Well, I'm not sure how that got in there. I think the kids were messing with the PowerPoint again. But yes, the cat's out of the bag. I do love Dairy Queen. And I was so bummed last night. Last night was November 1st. I actually did go to Dairy Queen to get a Blizzard, even though it was cold. And the first thing I saw was a sign that said, closed for business October 31st. And I was like, one day. Yeah, that's someone talking to me. So it's easy. We could talk about these things all day. Any of you can get up here in the pulpit and talk about love. It's really easy. It's simplistic. We all understand it until we stop and think about it. Because I realize Paul, who wrote 1 Corinthians 13, probably a lot smarter than I am. So I had to figure there's something more about the love that he's talking about than what I would talk about. This cross here, whenever I see the cross, I think about one thing over all others, and that is love. It's a self-sacrificial kind of love. that Christ exemplified so well. There's a story I want to share about a man who lived in Armenia. This was in December 1988. You may or may not be familiar with it. He dropped his son, whose name was Armand, off at an elementary school in the morning. And normally, either mom would come and get Armand in the afternoon and bring him home, or he would take the bus or something. It doesn't really matter. But that morning, for whatever reason, Armand said to his dad, "Daddy, just promise me you'll pick me up today and take me home." And Dad said, "Okay, I can make that promise to you today." Dad drove to work, went to the building. A few minutes later, the earth began to shake violently. The walls came crumbling in. Everything was just chaotic. This was an earthquake, but it wasn't just any earthquake. It ended up being an earthquake about 8.2 on the Richter scale. About 40 to 45,000 people died from this. And this was in December of 1988 in Armenia. Dad survived. His first thought when he got outside was, "I got to go find my son. I made him a promise, and I'm going to get him." So he couldn't drive because the streets were tattered at this point. So he ran as fast as he could to the elementary school. Only when he got there, it wasn't an elementary school. It was just a bunch of rocks and bricks and rubble. And there were people sobbing uncontrollably, realizing that they likely lost their son, their daughter, their friends. This was not a good situation. So Dad looked to the side where he figured the classroom used to be, and he saw a bunch of rubble, and he started digging, and he started digging, and he kept digging. People came up to him and said, "You know, you're really wasting your time. There's nothing you can do right now." Dad was undeterred. He kept digging. The authorities even came up to him and said, "Look, not only are you endangering yourself, you're endangering others. Why don't you just go home, let the experts take care of it, and we'll let you know what happens." Dad did not listen. He dug for 8 hours. He dug for 16 hours. He dug for 24 hours. He was really hungry. I'm sure he was really thirsty. No doubt he was really exhausted by now. No sign of the boy. He kept digging 36 hours. 36 hours. And then finally, on the 38th hour, he heard a voice. He said, "Dad?" And he said, "Armand, is that you? Is everyone okay?" And Armand said, "Yes, we're okay, Daddy. We're hurt, we're hungry, we're tired. But I told all the boys and girls that would listen that if my daddy was alive, he would come and save us because he made a promise to us." That dad's self-sacrificial love saved not only his son, but others as well. So when we talk about true love steps in when everything else is stepping out. True love seeks solutions when everything else says the situation is hopeless. True love remains steady when everything else has shaken loose. Perhaps most importantly, true love requires self-sacrifice. Now, I know that top picture is a bit graphic. I wasn't sure if I was going to put that on here, but, I look at that, and I don't see just blood and suffering. I look at that, and painted on that blood, if you look carefully enough, you'll see each of your names on there. Like Tony, I see your name written in that blood. Michelle, your name is on that blood. Steve, this is what it's all about. This is the love that Paul was talking about. What's love got to do with it? We're getting closer and closer. C.S. Lewis puts it this way. He says, "Love anything, and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully around with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safely in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that coffin, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love at all is to be vulnerable." Billy Graham puts it this way. He says, "When we preach atonement, it is atonement planned by love, provided by love, given by love, finished by love, necessitated because of love. When we preach the resurrection of Christ, we are preaching the miracle of love. When we preach the return of Christ, we are preaching the fulfillment of this love. Leighton Ford puts it this way. He says, God loves us the way we are, but he loves us too much to keep us that way. The ever-quotable G.K. Chesterton says, the Bible tells us to love our neighbors and also to love our enemies, probably because they're the same person. And I like to say that people everywhere need love, but especially those who might not deserve it. You ever feel that way? You ever feel that you don't deserve to be loved because some of the things that you've done to others? Or that you see someone who you don't care so much about and they're not worthy of your love? I'm sure we all feel that way sometimes. Okay, so where are we regarding this story? We spoke last week about the Spirit, about Pentecost, how we are all, even 2,000 years later, the Spirit is indwelling in each of us, provided we've been baptized. There was a man named Saul at the time. We all know about him. He was a Pharisee. He was brutal to the Christians. He persecuted them to no end. He stood there watching as Stephen, one of the first martyrs, was stoned to death. In fact, Saul was on his way to Damascus. He had the Damascus Road moment to persecute more Christians, when suddenly Christ intervened and said, Saul, enough of this. You're going to become Paul. You're going to get baptized. And you're going to be the best writer and defender of our faith that we've ever seen. And the rest is history. And we talked a little bit this morning about Paul's missionary journeys. We're not going to get into it again now. But where we are today is Corinth. And that's the second of the journeys. Now, he and Silas traveled through Macedonia first, which is where Paul wrote his letters to the Philippians. Or at least, well, he wrote his letter to the Philippians in jail. I should amend that. But he traveled through Philippi and Thessalonica and Berea. So now, he would end up in Corinth for about a year and a half. So Paul would get very comfortable with these people. But today, what takes center stage is love. There are 3 consecutive chapters in 1 Corinthians, 12, 13, 14. They all deal with spiritual gifts. Chapter 12 is more of like the Spirit's work in the believer. Chapter 13 is our motivation to use these gifts. And then chapter 14, the application of these gifts. It's interesting that the chapter in the center is the one which is most central to our faith. I don't know if that's a coincidence. So what I want you to do now, if you could open your Bibles to 1 Corinthians 13. I'm actually using the New Revised Standard Version. I know we usually use the NIV, but I kind of like this one a little bit better today. What I'm going to do now is start with 1 Corinthians 12, just the last 4 or 5 verses, just to see how Paul sets this up. Paul says to the Corinthians, you are the body of Christ and individually members of it. And God has appointed in the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then deeds of power, then gifts of healing, forms of assistance, forms of leadership, various kinds of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? Do all possess gifts of healing? Do all speak in tongues? Do all interpret? But strive for the greater gifts. And listen closely. I will show you a still more excellent way. What is the more excellent way that Paul is talking about? Well, of course, that's love. 1 Corinthians 13, and we're really only going to focus on the first 3 verses. I just wanted to hear Dominic's British accent and listen to the whole chapter. Thank you. But it really is a beautifully written, it's a hymn is what it is. It's a hymn in the praise of love. It's actually been called the strongest, deepest, most excellent thing Paul had ever written. And that's saying something. So with apologies to John Bon Jovi, I think we could say with confidence that it was the Corinthians who initially gave love a bad name. I guess I should give you apologies for that too. I just had to get that in. Okay. So now I'm going to read the first 3 verses of 1 Corinthians 13. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. This wasn't just your average podunk city. Corinth was kind of a thriving town at that time. A lot of political success, a lot of wealth, but they had a lot of factions. They were torn apart. They had some socioeconomic differences, and people wouldn't sit together at the Lord's Supper. People would come and get drunk during the Lord's Supper. They would completely abuse the purposes of it. They practiced some immoral or sexual immorality. And what really, I thought, grinded Paul's gears the most is that they denied any future resurrection. I think at that point, Paul said, all right, I need to talk to these guys. So when we look at this text a little bit more closely, the Christians back then considered 5 gifts to be very important. The first one was speaking in tongues. And for some reason, if you could speak in tongues, if you were eloquent in all these different languages, you were considered a very spiritual man or spiritual woman. But again, without love, it doesn't mean a whole lot. And what about knowledge? Also known as prophecy or education. What was their education like? What was their understanding? Well, it's interesting because Paul tells them 5 chapters earlier that knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Professor at my school used to say, people will not care how much you know until they know how much you care. Words to live by, indeed. Okay, the third gift is faith. Now, we don't consider faith a gift. We're all in here pretty faithful, I would think. But don't take that for granted. Do you remember the story of the Good Samaritan? Of course you do. The priest and the Levite walked along the road. They were very faithful people. I'm sure they were very knowledgeable. But were they loving? Did they demonstrate love as they walked by that man lying dead on the side of the road? No. Now, it was the Good Samaritan, who we don't know a whole lot about. If nothing else, he demonstrated godly, self-sacrificial love. In Galatians 5:6, Paul says, the only thing that counts is faith working through love. Another gift is generosity. And Jason kind of hit on this in his thoughts this morning. No, we don't need to give away all our possessions, okay? That's not the point. We hear it all the time. God knows our hearts. And this is not a sermon on giving or collecting and things like that. But it does bring up a burning question. What does it mean to give without love? A couple examples from our home. There's something called the Wounded Warrior Project. I don't know if anyone is familiar with it. It's basically an organization that supports men and women who were in war and they came home and they're physically handicapped, mentally handicapped, whatever. And I feel like it's a very good organization. And I have absolutely no problem giving them money. Doesn't really matter how much we give, but I do that out of love. No, I don't know these people personally, so I can't say I love each of them. But the fact is, we're doing that for the right reason. I'll compare that with, well, I'll just say the political affiliation of my choice. I'll just say that. Once I gave them money, so now every 6 days we get something in the mail saying, we need more. Well, I don't mind giving a political party money, but am I doing it with love, or am I doing it kind of out of, I don't know, anger with the way the world is being run? It's not the same thing. And because it's not the same thing, I'm starting to give less and less. So it's all about our heart when we give. I mean, think about Isaiah. Isaiah 6, I think we preached on that a little bit over the summer when God says, whom shall I send? And Isaiah says, here am I, send me. Isaiah loves God. He's not doing that out of obligation, but dedication. Are we doing things for the right reasons? And the fifth gift is accomplishment. Paul talks about martyrdom. If I hand over my body without love, it means nothing, which is ironic because Paul would be martyred. He'd be decapitated later on. Now I ask you this. Are you willing to lay down your life for the Lord? As we sit today in America, 2014, you're probably not going to have to answer that question. But I bet you Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego never thought they'd have to answer that question. And they did not eventually lose their lives, but what were they? They were willing to do it. Can we honestly say that we are willing to lay down our lives, if that's what it takes, for the Lord our God? That's true love. When we read the Bible, that's an act of love too. Or are we doing it kind of, well, I'm going to cross out this, I read Numbers, thank goodness that's over, I check that off. No, I mean, are we doing that? Or are we reading it out of love to get closer to God? Or to bring someone else closer to the Lord? Or what about prayer? You could say, well, I pray 2 times every day, I'm fine. Well, maybe. But are you praying out of obligation or dedication? Are you praying as more of a perfunctory prayer, kind of superficial? Or are you doing it out of love? Bottom line is this, and you know this. All these gifts, you can be the most gifted person in the world, but if you're doing these gifts without love, without the supreme love of Christ, it means nothing. These people in Corinth, they thought they were serving the Lord with these spiritual gifts, but Paul saw it another way completely. I'm going to give you a very quick Greek lesson. In the Greek Bible, in the Greek translation, there are 3 types of love that we talk about. Now, let me show you an example. John 21, 15 through 17. I'm not going to read it. This is when Jesus reinstates Peter after Peter kind of sold him down the river. Now, we look at this, and you see the word love, I think 7 times. When I say, I love Michelle, and then I say, well, I really love Dairy Queen. No, it's not the same thing. So the 3 types of love we're talking about. The first is eros, which is how you get the word erotic. And that's a really superficial, kind of low-level type of love. If you are physically attracted to someone, you say, wow, I love the way they look. Okay. It's kind of like the first stage of any romantic relationship. The next step is something called philos, P-H-I-L-O-S. You could also say phileo. That means the love you would have for a companion or a really good friend or maybe your biological sister and brother. In fact, did you know the city of Philadelphia, and Michelle's laughing because I say this all the time at home, the city of Philadelphia consists of 2 Greek words, phileo, love, and adelphos, which is brother. What is the nickname of Philadelphia? The city of brotherly love. There you go. And then there's agape. This is the love that Paul is shooting for. God is love. This is what we mean by God is love. It's agape love. It's divine. It's self-sacrificing. It's self-searching. It's the articulation of the Spirit. It's the very reality of the life of God and what he does in our lives. This is the more excellent way that Paul talks about in the previous chapter. You can agape your enemies, but you cannot phileo them. This is a completely foreign concept to so many people. But we need to be driving down that road. And oh, by the way, God commands this type of love among his Christians. You saw the English version of this. Now I'm going to show you a very shortened Greek version. Now watch this. The Greek translation. Jesus says, Simon, do you agape me more than these? Peter says, yes, Lord, you know that I phileo you. Simon, do you agape me? Yes, Lord, you know that I phileo you. Simon, do you phileo me? Lord, you know that I phileo you. These words cannot be used interchangeably. I think what Jesus is getting at here is he's not our pal. He's not our buddy. He's so much, well, he is, but he's so much more than that, right? Is our love for Christ in the agape way, or more of like, he's a good friend, he's a companion? Now, I'm going to take it one step further. Verses 4 through 7 in today's text, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to substitute Jesus or Jesus Christ for the word love. And this is in 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 7. Let's see how it sounds. Jesus Christ is patient. Jesus Christ is kind. Jesus is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. Christ does not insist on his own way. He is not irritable or resentful. Jesus does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. Christ bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. It really makes you wonder. How do we apply this into our lives? Well, Christ can be thought of as love in the context of the cross. Now, this is a New Testament idea. In the Old Testament, their type of love was a little different, right? Now, some examples in the Old Testament of love was kind of Jerry Springer-like. I mean, Adam and Eve, and they were our progenitors, so you can't really get too hard on them. Then you had Rebecca and Isaac, Jacob and Rachel. They were okay. They had some issues. They're like David and Bathsheba. And that was all kind of, well, we already talked about this before. Now, I have no doubt that David was a God-fearing man. But initially, his love for Bathsheba, well, that was not agape. Now, of course, God fixed that, and we got Solomon from that, so it wasn't all bad. But that was the Old Testament perspective. The cross brings everything to a different level in the New Testament. In fact, I would say Deuteronomy 6:5, where the command, God says, you shall love your Lord the God, or the Lord your God with all your strength and all your hope and all your might. That's the closest we get in the Old Testament to this agape love. I think I could put it to you like this. It's easy for us to love our family. Well, most of the time. It's easy for us to love our children. It's easy for us to love our spouses. It's easy for us, a lot of the times, to love the brothers and sisters in this church. But then, what if we start arguing about things? What if doctrine gets in the way? What if theory gets in the way? What if the way church is run gets in the way? Can we still have a loving conversation with each other? We're not going to agree with each other on every single thing. Not on this side of heaven. But are we arguing and discussing it with love? And what about people who might not know the gospel? How can we show our love to them? Well, we could be nice to them. We could smile and offer them rides. But to me, one of the best things you can do, I'll put it this way, the best sign of love that someone ever gave me was telling me about Jesus Christ. Plain and simple. If you could return that favor to someone, that is agape love. That's what Paul is talking about with the more excellent way. Remember, this originates from a God who is love. 1 John 4:7 and 8, we all know this song. Beloved, let us love one another because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. Paul makes it quite clear what love is, doesn't he? But do we understand the clarity of this? Or is it too muddled? You know, I think of the movie Forrest Gump. And poor Forrest, the whole time he keeps telling the woman of his dreams, Jenny, that he loves her, and he loves her, and he loves her. And then finally Jenny snaps and says, you know what, Forrest? You don't know what love is. And that just cuts Forrest right to the core. Poor Forrest. Well, it's a heartbreaking scene in a heartbreaking movie. But for whatever reason, that has always stuck out to me. But do we understand completely what this love is? Can we tell a non-believer that we are saved not because of anything we did, but because of the blood on that cross? That is love, and if that is not love, I don't know how to explain it to anyone. And along these lines, imagine the pain you endure when you lose a loved one. And I know pretty much everyone in here has gone through that at least once. That's what love is. That pain that you feel, that emptiness inside, that's love. As C.S. Lewis said, you can avoid that kind of emotion, but then you can't love anything. Are we willing to go down that road? I hope not. Love is also eternal life, knowing that even when you do lose someone close to you, you have that chance of seeing them again, that hope. And why in the world would you not want that? That is our hope. The love a parent has for a child cannot be explained to someone who is not a parent. The love that Christ has for us cannot adequately be explained to someone who is a non-believer. We need to get them involved, get them in the game, so to speak. We need to be willing to do that. So 4 of the key points are as follows. We need to transfer the unconditional love of God to our love for His creation. Love is not merely tolerance for one another. We're not just putting up with each other, right? There's going to be conflict, and sometimes we have to have tough love. I think every parent understands that. Love is patient with people, but not circumstances. Circumstances can change. It's beyond our control. That's kind of like hate the sin, not the sinner. And finally, God sent His Son to the world not to be served, but to save and serve us with love. So as we come to our conclusion here, do you ever think that you wait until it's too late to tell someone how you feel about them? I feel like sometimes the only time we say nice things about someone is at their funeral. Perhaps the 3 most regrettable words in the English language are, I should have. I should have told him how much I appreciated him while he was still alive. Man, I hope she realizes how much she was loved. Let's not get to that point. Why would we wait? What is holding us back? Are we scared of something? I want to close with a story. It's more of a diary entry. I did not commit it to memory. But just bear with me. It's about, it's used in a male perspective who started out in his 10th grade year. And this is what he wrote in his diary. As I sat there in English class, I stared at the girl next to me. She was my so-called best friend. I stared at her long, silky hair and wished she was mine. But she didn't notice me like that, and I knew it. After class, she walked up to me and asked me for the notes she had missed the day before. I handed them to her. She said thanks and gave me a kiss on the cheek. I want to tell her, I want her to know that I don't want to be just friends. I love her so much, but I'm just too shy, and I don't know why. 11th grade, the phone rings. On the other end, it was her. She was in tears, mumbling on about how the love of her life had broken her heart. So she asked me to come over because she didn't want to be alone. So I did. As I sat next to her on the sofa, I stared at her soft eyes, wishing she was mine. After 2 hours, 1 Drew Barrymore movie, and 3 bags of chips, I decided it was probably time for me to go home. She looked at me, said thanks, and gave me a kiss on the cheek. I want to tell her. I want her to know that I don't want to be just friends, but I don't know how. I'm too shy, and I don't know why. Senior year, one fine day, she walked to my locker. My date is sick, she said. He's not going to go. Well, I didn't have a date. And I remember in 7th grade, we made a promise that if neither of us had a date, we'd go as best friends. So we did. That night, after everything was over, I was standing at her front doorstep. I stared at her as she smiled at me and stared at me with her crystal eyes. Then she said, I had the best time, thanks, and gave me a kiss on the cheek. I want to tell her, I want her to know that I don't want to be just friends. I love her, but I'm just too shy, and I don't know why. Graduation. A day passed, then a week, then a month. Before I could blink, it was graduation day. I watched as her perfect body floated like an angel up on stage to get her diploma. I wanted her to be mine, but she didn't notice me like that, and I knew it. Before everyone went home, she came to me in her cap and gown and cried as I hugged her. Then she lifted her head from my shoulder and said, "You're my best friend, thanks," and, well, gave me a kiss on the cheek. I want to tell her, I want her to know that I don't want to be just friends. I love her, but I'm too shy to tell her, and I don't know why. Marriage. Now I sit in the pews of the church. That girl is getting married now, and she's about to drive off to her new life, married to another man. I wanted her to be mine, but, she didn't see me like that, and I knew it. But before she drove away, she came to me and said, "You came." She said thanks and kissed me on the cheek. I want to tell her, I want her to know, that I love her, and I don't want to be just friends, but I'm just too shy, and I don't know why. Death. Years passed. I looked down at the coffin of a girl who used to be my best friend. And at the service, people must have known what I had done because they read a diary entry she had written in her high school years. And this is what it read. I stare at him, wishing he was mine. But he doesn't notice me like that, and I know it. I want to tell him. I want him to know that I don't want to be just friends. I love him so much, but I'm just too shy, and I don't know why. I wish he would just tell me already that he loved me. I wish I did too, I thought to myself, and walked away and cried. I ask you not to be that guy. Don't be that woman. Don't wait until it's too late. Makes me think of John's Gospel 13, 34 and 35 when he says, I give you a new commandment. This is Jesus talking, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Oh, by the way, that's not a suggestion. That's a command. It's a little different. So to answer the question I posed earlier, what's love got to do with it? Everything. So let me ask you these. What do these words mean to us? What are you going to do with the words that we heard today? Are we committed to walking in this most excellent way? Is there anything that we're holding on to that we are not willing to give up for Christ? So now I want to extend an invitation. Perhaps there are some of you out here who might not have any knowledge about what any of this means because you don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ. Perhaps you've prayed a sinner's prayer, but haven't yet been baptized. Well, now is the time. You never know when it's going to be your last day in a church. Why wait? And keep in mind, when you are baptized, when you receive the gospel of Christ, it is not an addition to your life. It is an exchange of your former life. I want you to think about that. And if you want to come up and pledge your life to the Lord, we're happy to help you out. Think about that as we stand and sing.